Livestream is your premier place to watch live events on the web, mobile devices, and connected TVs. See new events daily or broadcast your own at livestream.com. Livestream. Be there.
Broadcasting live from the Vegas Video Network studios, just steps from the Las Vegas Strip, it's Talktails with Chris Phillips. Coming up on today's show, he's rich, he's famous, he's Robin Leach. And now a man whose pillowcases are made from Crown Royal velvet bags, Mr. Chris Phillips.
Well, once again, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the greatest city in the world, otherwise known as the entertainment capital of the world. You are watching Talktails here on the Vegas Video Network. And I am your host, Chris Phillips, and I have to apologize right off the bat for being absent last week. And I'll tell you, Scott, this is kind of a first for me. We have now done about, I would say, 18, 19 episodes. And in tribute to my first guest, I think, for the first time in all of these shows, sober and not hungover. Because what a waste. I wanted to make sure that the two of us were able to get tossed together. And folks, I can't even tell you how excited I am to have with us not only a dear friend of mine, but just the mere mention of his name, his face, and certainly the sound of his voice conjures up images of the rich, the famous, and of course, the celebrity lifestyle that his entire brand has been associated with now for decades. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, I am talking about the one and only Robin Leach, who is with me today. And I have to say, I've not only been a fan of this man for many, many years, as so many of us have, but even more importantly, since moving here 5 years ago, I can honestly say he is one of the kindest individuals that I have met since living here. And we would love to have him join us, if you don't mind. Robin, come on over here, and I couldn't be more proud to have you as a guest.
This is the first show I've ever done where you can actually get drunk. It's on a bona fide basis. Thank you for all those kind things.
Well, Robin, let me tell you something. When we came to Las Vegas 5 years ago from Arizona, you were the first person who took a minute of their time to interview us and to take interest in what we were doing. And from that time, we have become friends. And since then, I have been trying and begging you to come on this program, and you have somehow found a few minutes in your busy schedule to take pity and charity on our small little show.
Last weekend, you were away. The previous weekend, I was in Montreal. The weekend before that, I was in the Bahamas. So,
well, this is truly a thrill for me, because as I and so many people have looked to you to base their opinions on things going on, of course, here in Las Vegas, which you have now called yourself a resident over the last 10 years. You have had something of a love affair with the city of Las Vegas.
I love this city, just like you do.
I do very much so.
It's got great people in it. It's still got that pioneer spirit. It's a huge city, but a very tiny town in the heart.
Well, it possesses a maverick spirit, so to speak, as you do to some degree. And right off the bat, I just have to ask before I forget, you got to go see your friend and one of the greatest living entertainers, Liza Minnelli, this weekend.
Yes, indeed.
How was that? I'm dying to ask about that, because I didn't have a chance to go.
Liza is something else. She's got a voice that belies her age. She's, I guess the way to describe her is that she's an actress-singer.
Yes,
she's
an interpreter of.
She's an actress-singer.
Right.
And when she'd finished this set, the band walked off, she walked off, and the people kept chanting her name.
Heard she got
standing ovations? 5 standing ovations. She got 7 standing ovations on Saturday night.
Oh, my God.
So she walks back on stage to bow, and then she decides to sing an entire song without the orchestra.
Oh, for goodness sake.
And as I
wrote... That
separates
separates her from...
from so many people. As I wrote, you could have heard a pin drop while she was singing. No band, no nothing. You couldn't even hear the breathing of the crowd. It was amazing. Takes a lot of chutzpah to do that. Or a lot of ginger ale.
Well, you're talking about a young lady who's been in the business now for many decades, and she's been to that rodeo before, so to speak.
Yes, and you know, she's such a professional performer. I saw her also in Italy. We've known each other a long time, but I saw her in Italy this summer, and that was a magical experience. She sang in an open-air Colosseum, and the moon was actually the major spotlight on her.
Oh, beautiful.
And she started to sing a song, and she got, I don't know, 30, 40 seconds into the song, and got a croak in her throat, frog in her throat, whatever you call it, you singers. And she stopped the show and apologized to the audience and said, "Excuse me," coughed, take some water, coughed again, got rid of the little, and she said, "Now we'll do it, and now we'll do it properly." And you know, I don't know too many people who would actually have the courage to stop a show. I mean, you know, everything is keyed to timing and computer control boards. She didn't care. She just stopped the show. She said, "I'm going to do it right, and you're going to hear it right." Well, quite amazing.
Well, she's certainly one of my influences as to why I not only wanted to become an entertainer, but more specifically, a Vegas entertainer, because she's certainly one of the names that are kind of associated with the history of entertainment in this town, along with her buddies, you know, Frank and Sammy and all them. And,
yeah, the Rat Pack.
You know, I got to see her actually on my honeymoon. This is kind of strange. I was married some years ago. We came to Las Vegas, and one of the reasons we came here is just so I could see Liza Minnelli. We went and saw Liza. We were exhausted. We went back to the hotel room, fell asleep, and we slept through our entire honeymoon. But I know it's an odd story. That kind of symbolized my marriage at the time, I think. But you mentioned the written...
It's the dark side that we want from Chris, not from me.
You.
So really, how bad was that marriage?
Well.
And how bad was that honeymoon?
But we saw Liza, and it was
That's
beautiful.
all that counts.
That's all that matters.
You know, she was 11 years old the first time that she ever stepped foot on the stage in Vegas. 11.
And that was with the influence of her parents, I'm assuming.
Oh, obviously, Judy Garland and Vincent Minnelli.
Right.
She's a remarkable entertainer.
She really is. And you mentioned the written word, and I think one of the things that I find most interesting about you, Robin, is that I would think most people internationally associate you with your experience on TV, with your television shows, and of course, the sound of your voice, which in my opinion is probably one of the 2 or 3 most recognizable voices in the history of recorded media.
Wow. North of Howard Cosell.
I was just going to say, Howard Cosell ranks up there with one of the 2 or 3 that I would...
And it's in this fighting mood tonight.
Yes. You know, that's good company to be in, nonetheless. But what I find interesting is that I think if you were to admit you were actually inspired as a young man, and still to this day, to be more of a writer of the written word.
I love the written word.
Is it true you still write up to 5,000 words a day of copy?
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
Well, funnily enough, it isn't to me, but I know that a lot of people have problems writing, and I sit at that keyboard and out it comes. I go back and correct it, but it flows like the brain thinks. I'm very fortunate with that gift, and that gift really got fine-honed for television. You know, when I started on television, even before we started Entertainment Tonight, I was doing TV projects with Regis Philbin. On ABC, and the joy of writing something that is then immediately spoken is the passion, in other words, covers the keyboard more than the fingers do, and so you have to learn to write how you would speak if you were delivering a news story, a breaking news, a developing story. So I find it I find it quite easy to do, even though it may frighten a lot of other people.
Well, I think a lot of people may not know that you got your start actually as a newspaper man.
Yeah.
Back when you were 15 years old, living outside of London.
That was when I started drinking.
It's when, well...
But in those days, I didn't drink champagne, couldn't afford it. You know, it was beer.
Would you please tell us the story? I find this so interesting. I know you're probably sick of telling the story, but I find it so fascinating, and those who may not have heard this, I would love for you to share with us, I think, something that is so incredible in terms of how it inspired you then to continue on when you got your first job at your first paper, and how they sent you out onto an assignment, and who you actually ended up having as one of your very first interviews. This is such a great story.
It's a story that I love retelling, so it's not a problem. When I was 11 and went to school, my only dream was to work for the local newspaper in a town called Harrow, which is 20 miles outside of London.
The Harrow Observer.
The Harrow Observer, yes. And every week I would send the news of the happenings at school to the editor with a little note saying that I would love to come and work for you when I leave school. And that never, ever replied once to say, thank you for sending in the story, come see us when you leave school. Nothing, silence. But every week they printed this little story with my initials on the bottom of it. So I said, well, as long as they keep doing that, there's hope. I leave school the Friday that we graduated, although we don't call it graduation in England. But that Friday, I ran from school in short pants to the newspaper office and asked to see the editor. And he said, we've been expecting you. You start work Monday. So I started work Monday, and I honestly thought, I'd have to clean up the cups of tea and run paper, copy paper to all. This is way before computers. This was when you had carbon paper between two sheets of paper. And that first Monday, I never forget it. He called everybody into the newsroom, introduced me to everybody, said, this is the new reporter, the new cub reporter. Took a dart and hurled it at the map of the town of Harrow, which is a considerable sized town. And it landed on a street. And he said, a random house somewhere, yes. And he said, you go to that street and you write the page 3 feature this week called On the Street Where You Live. And that was it. I mean, that was thrown right in the deep end. And so I went off. I was pedaling on a bicycle because I was too young to drive a car or anything. Pouring down with rain. And I figured that the best place to go and get shelter was in the apartment building, in the block of flats at the end. And I also figured out that the person who lived on the top was probably the most successful person in the tower.
Probably the most interesting. Yes.
Hopefully the most interesting, but certainly probably the most successful. So I knocked on the door, and a guy comes to the door. And that's a surprise in England because it should be the woman who comes to the door.
He should be working during the day.
The guy should be away working. So I introduced myself and asked, how come you're at home and there's not a lady at the house that answered the door? And he said, well, I work from home. And I said, well, first of all, back in 1958, that was really unusual.
Sure.
Not so today because we have computers at home. And anyway, he said he was a composer. And I didn't understand that, and I sort of ignorantly said, those ink blots that go on the top of the 5 lines?
Right.
And he said, yeah. So I asked him what he was writing, and he said he was writing a musical called Stop the World, I Want to Get Off, for Anthony Newley.
And unheard of musical at the time, of course. And
that moment onwards, it was, I was sort of hooked on show business more than any other form of journalism.
Well, obviously, with that influence and your interest in celebritism, it brought you to New York then, about
Eventually,
63, did it?
61, 63, you're right, 63. I joined the Daily Mail in 61, and then I came to America in 63. But the nice thing of that story, the end of that story, which is so beautiful, is that I'm still friends to this day with Leslie Bricusse.
Are you really?
Who wrote all of those great songs. And he and his wife, Evie, remain still friends of mine to this
Became
day.
a legend.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. I can't even fathom over the years the relations that you have attained with various celebrities and people in the business over the years.
That's some of the dark side that the producer here wants to know about.
Well, speaking of
you start saying those relationships that you had with all those people.
Well, some of those people are actually, if you can believe it or not, watching you right now live, and they are in our live chat room that we have.
Yes.
And what you may or may not know is we would love, if you don't mind, to accept a question or two from the people watching us right now.
Absolutely.
And our producer is going to hopefully not kill me if I do not get right to one of these questions that he is so anxious for me to have you ask. What is that, Scott?
Good God.
Nate wants to know, does Robin miss being on TV, and is he working on anything right now?
Nate, it's sweet of you to ask. No, I don't miss being on television like I used to be. I still do guest shots and guest shows many times a year, but I like to control it to my time frame these days. When I was doing Lifestyles, that literally was 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for 14 years. And it nigh on killed me. You know, it takes an awful lot of time to make a 1-hour television show. So, and you have to remember that with Lifestyles, we were traveling all over the world. And so when you edit it, write it, score it, and do all those things, it took literally about 3 to 4 weeks of shooting and editing to do 1 hour of television.
Well, what I find interesting is that you were one of the pioneers in this type of television. I know that you were working on ET at the time as a field reporter and covering celebrities to some degree, but it was your need and want to kind of dig further into their lives and into their homes and into their excesses, so to speak. And so at that point, your good buddy, Al, decided to create this show that set a precedent to this day for reality shows and whatnot.
We were the first of the reality shows when you think about it. You know, I'd worked with Al at Entertainment Tonight, and we're talking about a remarkable man called Al Massini.
Yes.
Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but he was a genius with creating television shows. And I went to him with an idea for Lifestyles. I'd gone to him because I was upset that on Entertainment Tonight we would go into these people's homes and we wouldn't talk with them about anything other than their careers, which I thought was, who really wants to know that Gene Simmons' secret desire is to stretch and do Shakespeare in Central Park? What we really want to know is just how many girls did Gene Simmons sleep with over the years?
And the bed in which he may have...
Show us that bed.
Yes.
And show us the maneuvers. and so that to me was far better use of television to do storytelling than it was to ask Gene Simmons about doing Shakespeare. So...
well, you obviously hit upon quite a success, and my gosh, you guys had a hell of a run.
To this day, Lifestyles is still one of the longest running shows ever on television, 14 years. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
And then the last several years, you had a co-host, did you not? And you changed the name to some degree?
Yeah. Well, we brought in... I'd actually got to the point where I was sick to death of traveling the world. I mean, I know it sounds strange.
Is it true
but
you
were
amassing 200,000 miles?
Yeah, more.
Or more?
More.
No.
More.
That's unbelievable. No.
Yeah, I mean, it was a nightmare. I had 6 TV crews with me. And I would hop from one city to the next and go through the 6 crews who would be waiting as I moved on. And they would stay behind and shoot all of the ancillary B-roll, the beauty stuff. You know, I'd race in, do the interview, do my stand-ups, and then I'd be out every night on the next overnight flight to the next city. I mean, it was the jigsaw puzzle of organizing that was a nightmare, but I loved doing it because I'm a Virgo, therefore I'm a pain in the neck. But we did that constantly, and then you would come home for 3 weeks, and you would edit everything that you had shot. And you would put the music to it and assemble it and choose the running order of each show, and then you go back out on the road again.
Now, with all those years,
tough.
I can imagine meeting all those celebrities, obviously a lot of very influential people over the years. Was there a particular celebrity or individual you never got to meet or interview that you always had a desire to meet and they just got by you somehow?
Well, I never got to Katharine Hepburn, which I would love to have done. I think she was such a class act.
She was.
But, you know, we even did the Pope.
You were one of the few people that got access to the Vatican City. I can't imagine what that must have been like.
Well, it took many, many months of,
of
begging and cajoling and pleading and everything. And we finally got the approval to come and shoot the Pope, and he was going to be our guide to the treasures of the Vatican. And nobody believed that we'd pulled this off. I mean, I didn't even believe it myself. And so I flew to Rome on the day that we were going to do this shoot. And that evening before the shoot, we met with the I don't know what they called that, the priests, the deacons of the church,
Sure.
to go through the rules and regulations about what we could say, what we couldn't say, And then I remember the last question. As long as I live, I will never forget this question. And so help me, dear God, this is the truth. As I'm leaving, they said to me, what do you want him to wear in the morning? And I'd never ever thought in terms of that the Pope had to have wardrobe instructions, right?
Sure.
Everybody else in television has wardrobe instructions. I didn't think the Pope had to be given wardrobe instructions. So I looked very quizzically at the bishop, and I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, do you want him in the ordinary gear or in his party frock? And I will never, ever forget that as long as I live. And of course, I chose the party frock.
Well, speaking of which,
which is the affectionate term for all of the
decorative garb. Yeah, right. Now, the thing that's got to be most aggravating about being the Pope is you're, without question, probably the most famous person walking the face of the earth. To think how many babes he could get. That's got to be so aggravating.
Only Chris Phillips could think of the misuse of power.
God,
I thought you were going to say...
He could pull in the tail? Oh, my God.
But he can't...
Thanks, Scott.
You're going to have so many complaints from people.
But think about it.
Think about it.
God.
What are all the nuns there for? Anyway, now I'm going to get the complaints. Pull yourself together. Have a drink.
Well,
You're not drinking as fast as I am.
Well, speaking of babes, you are...
That wasn't quite the segue I was thinking of, but it's okay.
Anybody who knows of you here in town, you are...
They're all nieces. They're all nieces. I just have an expanded family of nieces.
Scott, I've had the occasion of running into Robin on several occasions out socially.
Many in the same evening, I might add.
I have never seen my friend Robin when he has not been surrounded by a bevy of beautiful, blonde, buxom babes.
Look at all those alliterations that began with B.
Nice. Yes, I worked hard on that.
You missed out bikini. You missed out you missed out busty.
Buoyant, perhaps.
Well, in this city, most of them are.
Now, I admire you for that. I have to say, but
it's better to do that than to take Dr. Johnson's youth pills.
Oh, give me a prescription, would you?
It keeps you young. What can I tell you?
Well, speaking of Las Vegas, you're Mr. Famous Pants all over the world. What lured you into wanting to come to Las Vegas? Because I know since then you have been very influential in this town, and you brought a lot of recognition here in terms, particularly in the fine cuisine that has been something that is a rather new advent to this community. Well, thanks large in part because of what you did.
Thank you. I was living very happily between New York and Los Angeles, 2 weeks in each of the two cities, doing lots of different TV projects. And, I was one of the founding fathers of the Food Network.
Food Network, absolutely.
And with the creation of the Food Network, we sort of turned unknown chefs into stars. And friends of mine in Atlantic City had asked me, would I create a program of superstar chefs coming down to Atlantic City and doing these extraordinary high roller dinners. And we did it, and it was unbelievably successful. I mean, so much so that we had to sign exclusive contracts with chefs to stop other hotels copying us. Mm-hmm. Well, my friends happened to be the three executives who got selected by Sheldon Adelson to come here to Vegas and get involved in the demolition of the old Sands Hotel. And they called me and said, could we expand that program when we get our hotel built here in Las Vegas into an even larger scope plan. And so they had, we put together an idea where we would have the top 10 chefs in America would each own a restaurant here at the property. And out of that, we were going to build a TV studio that would become almost the West Coast branch of the Food Network.
Sure.
So I came out to Vegas, and we started putting that together, and eventually that became the Venetian. And the chefs were put in there with their restaurants. We never did build the studio, unfortunately, because 9/11 came along, and that stopped one set of the Venetian expansion back then. But the chefs all came here. And while I was here for 2.5 years getting all of that and bringing Sophie Loren over for the opening of the Venetian, I started to fall in love with the city.
Yes.
And I got involved one night with Keep Memory Alive, which is the Alzheimer's charity here. And the microphone failed that night. And I sort of went to the rescue. I volunteered to come to the rescue because there was no audio system. Because I know that the one thing that I was given as a blessing was a very powerful voice.
To project, yes.
And we made a lot of money that night out of a disaster.
Isn't that something?
And Larry Ruvo, who was the chairman of Keep Memory Alive, asked me if I would come back and do that every year. And I said yes, not knowing at that moment I had sort of said, well, I'm going to live in Las Vegas. and you know, the other thing was that I looked around at the landscape here, and television had always been frowned upon by the casinos. They thought that this box should be locked in the armoire in the bedroom that should never be opened, because they really feared it. They really thought that television was a device that stopped people from gaming.
Right.
You can put the television out on the floor of a hotel room in Vegas. It's never going to stop anybody from going out and enjoying themselves. And so I started to tell people, you've got to use television. You mustn't be frightened of it. Use it. And so we did a number of things. We brought Oprah here for a week with her TV series. We brought MTV here to shoot stuff. So there was a lot of ways to exploit something of my past in helping Vegas explode at a time when it really needed to be on the map.
Especially with the younger markets and the youth that kind of viewed Vegas as being something a little bit of...
Look, the Vegas Video Network is celebrating its first anniversary currently, and George Maloof next month celebrates his 10th anniversary with the Palms.
Yes.
And the first thing that we had at the Palms was MTV's Real World.
And that really kind of set the tone.
That was the first time that yes, exactly. And
what
television,
a powerful tool that was to lure people into our city.
And now we have, I'm guessing we have at least 2 or 3 TV shows a week on average doing something with Las Vegas. So that's great.
Well, speaking of living in Las Vegas and what you've done since then, I would love to get into what you've been up to lately. But we're going to take a short little break. We're going to be back in just a minute. But ladies and gentlemen, I am so honored to say that I'm beyond flattered to be sitting here with my friend, Mr. Robin Leach on Talktails. I am Chris Phillips. We'll be back in just a second.
And fire in those questions.
Hey, I'm Al, man. Is that how you get them to do that all the time? Just sit there and be an ass. Is that it? Hey, I'm Al. Hey, I'm Al Mancini at Top of the Food Chain. You are watching the Vegas Video Network. We got big forks, big spoons. I got a big mouth. I got no guests.
Well, howdy, friends, and once again, welcome back to Talktails here on the Vegas Video Network. We are sitting here with someone who certainly doesn't need any introduction. This is Robin Leach, everybody. And before we get going on furthering our discussions about Las Vegas, I want to let you know that if you ever have any kind of questions or comments through the week, please contact us by going simply to Talktails at vegasvideonetwork.com. We would love to get back to you at least within the next 2 months. with any answers we may have to your questions. But folks, unless you've been living under a rock for the past 20, 30 years, you certainly know who my guest is today. And
so kind.
Well, it's very true, my friend. And certainly we were talking about how you have benefited this city in terms of your presence and your influence, and you were speaking about how you were somehow single-handedly able to convince the city that the medium of television is such a tremendous tool in luring in potential customers, especially those that maybe not has ever been to Las Vegas, particularly those that are younger, by, like you said, George Maloof having the MTV program and whatnot. But speaking of programs, I didn't know something until last night, that you were the one who produced that documentary on Madonna called Exposed. That's so cool. How did that come about?
We did a series of specials. At one stage of my life, we did the Royal Family of Britain Exposed. We did Madonna Exposed.
Yes.
Madonna tried to stop us, and
oh, really?
This was live television, and we started the show with a challenge that if you didn't like anything we have on the air, send your lawyers down. We gave them the address of the studio, because all I was praying was that her lawyers would come into the studio and shut us down, because it would make great publicity. But unfortunately, she didn't. But we ran the show. We heard afterwards that she was not that displeased with it.
Well, that's probably rare.
But I wish that she had actually shut us down. It would have been great. I love that kind of controversial
I do too.
television, and who better than Madonna at that time to do it? Today it would be like doing Lady Gaga, and we're going to expose Lady Gaga. Although I think, quite frankly, she's exposed everything: her body, her roots, her past. So, you know, we've done so many different television projects over the years. I
even
love
did
it.
something with Matt Lauer. I thought that was interesting.
I had a show. It was the only show that I gambled a lot of money on and lost.
Really?
We lost $8 million on a show called Preview. And Preview I thought was a really fascinating show. And it was the next 7 days of everything in entertainment. So whatever new movies were coming out for the next 7 days, you got to see them in advance of everybody else. Whatever new records were being released, you heard them 7 days before they were coming out. Everything was Preview the next 7 days on every aspect of entertainment. I thought it was a great idea, too complicated for the public to understand. And the anchor that I hired was a young man from Philadelphia called Matt Lauer.
Isn't that something?
And I hired him.
That's so cool.
I hired Matt Lauer, and I told him 7 weeks later that I'd run out of money in order to keep financing the show, and the ratings weren't doing well. It's the only show out of 16, by the way, that we lost. So I mustn't be upset about it. And Matt Lauer, as you know, sent the audition tape to NBC from our show Preview and landed the Today Show.
Well, look what you've done. See, that's.
Well, I don't know whether that's good or bad.
Well,
but look, he's happy and he's making a lot of money, so I'm very pleased for him.
Well, you were.
And he's still a good friend to this day too.
Well, speaking of friends, we have many friends of yours who are watching right now.
Many.
Some of which are in our chat room.
Okay.
And I know that Scott is dying to get to some more questions, if you don't mind, by some of our viewers right now that have questions for Mr. Leach. Scott.
Yeah, we got 3 questions. First one is from Bill G. He wants to know, did you meet any rich or famous people who were just a pain in the ass?
That's how they became both rich and famous, Bill. I always remember the most aggravating interview that I ever did was I was playing ping pong, of all things, with at that point the richest man in the world. I'm not going to say that I'm a great table tennis player, but for want of a better thing to do, I decided to play ping pong against the richest man in the world, and I was beating him, and he said, "I've never been beaten before." And it didn't occur to me as to why he'd said that until the ball went off the table and I went to get it, and the bodyguard's foot was lowered on my hand, and he said, "Mr. K has never, ever lost at this game." And then I understood why he'd always won. I said, "Screw it, I'm still going to beat him," and I beat him 21-12. So
well,
yeah,
there you go.
But fortunately, you know, it's really interesting because rich and famous people, they're defensive. They're fragile people, strangely enough. And
very insecure.
What the job, they're insecure and they're workaholics. And what my job was always was to get the story from them and for me to be in the least conspicuous place between the viewer and the interviewee who was telling the story. So you heard my voice, but you didn't get to see a lot of me because I believe that all my job was a link between the people that you really wanted to hear all about. Scott, question number 2.
Number 2, Shannon wants to know, do you remember the first and last guest on Lifestyles?
Well, the first guest was Siegfried and Roy right here in Las Vegas.
Yes.
And they're still friends to this day, and they were my first guests on Entertainment Tonight.
Yes.
And they also did the Food Network when they came to New York with their baby tigers, so they've been really good friends over the years. Do you know, I don't actually remember who was the last... Oh, I do. It was me, because I always vowed... It's true. I've just remembered. I always said, and I will be the last guest when I decide to shut the show down.
Because who is more rich and famous and a bigger celebrity than
dozens more, but it was the first time that we showed sort of a little off-camera side of my life. And, you know, yes, the blondes and the brunettes were in the hot tub, and yes, they were drinking champagne with me, and everything you've always thought and feared about yours truly, it was proven true.
Well, that's exactly what we would hope to think.
Yeah.
Okay, next question from Gino Torino. How did Robin develop the voice delivery style characterized by Dana Carvey as, "I'm screaming and I don't know why"?
Okay, and Scott, that was a lousy impression. Yes, it was. Dana Carvey doing a lousy impression of me.
When I saw that question, I thought, oh, crap. I don't know how to do that. Hopefully he'll have enough
Here's
champagne,
the true story behind this. If you go back and you look at the old Entertainment Tonight shows, I didn't screech or scream like Scott's just said, Dana Carvey always said. When we started writing the very first special for Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, because these homes were so jaw-droppingly gorgeous, and I was like stunned when I walked into some of these places, I went back to my old days of tabloid journalism in Fleet Street in London and said, we have to find a way to tell the story on television just like newspapers would tell a huge breaking story in print. Now, if you know, print in newspapers normally runs at like 14 point to 26 point is the most they'll do with a headline. When war breaks out, or America invades Cuba, it jumps right up to 96 point, which is screaming headlines. And it was at that point I said, we have to duplicate that. And the same amazement that I had for being in huge homes, I said, we have to scream it like that. And so that's really where it came from. And it also came about, in a sense, by accident, by default, because I was genuinely excited. I mean, if you land in Australia, as I did one morning, and was taken to the largest home that I'd ever seen in my life up until then, which was owned by a gentleman who imported the first Rolls Royces into Australia and kept that franchise all these years. His house was so large that it had a road inside the home with a chauffeur-driven limousine to take you from the bedroom area down to the living room and dining room. Now, if you see that, that's undercover in a house. How are you not going to scream and say, holy moly, have you ever seen a house with a road inside it? And then, you know, here was the funny thing. People always said, well, how did you find these houses? I mean, you remember some of the homes we found were pretty unbelievable. Whenever I left somebody's house, I always said to them, I think I've just found the largest home in the world. Congratulations. And they said, You haven't been to the house with the 365 rooms in Germany where they have 7 people winding the clocks day and night? And I said no, and then I jump on a plane and go to Germany. And you would do the same thing when you landed in Germany, and they would tell you about... See, there were no yellow pages back in those days to start with, and there would be no listing for rich and famous houses.
You couldn't Google it.
You couldn't Google it. There was no Google. In fact, you know, when we started that show, there was no fax machines, and Federal Express hadn't been quite invented yet. So it was a real challenge to find these places, and we found that the best place to find them was to ask the rich people themselves who had better than they had. They always knew, because they wanted to jump up one higher.
And to accent that, you had to have 96-point vocal inflection.
Whatever it was. I know we used to blow out the microphone sometime in the recording studio when we were voice tracking.
Well, speaking of your voice, obviously, which has gone down into being something that could be, if there was a recording of your voice, it belongs in the Smithsonian, to say the least.
Thank you.
But what do you feel when you hear these other kind of knockoff shows that try to emulate the luxury lifestyle cribs, where they emulate, or they literally copy your voice, or at least attempt to? How does that make you feel? Is there any kind of infringement of some sort?
No,
I know you can't.
No.
You can't trademark your voice.
I look at it as a cheap compliment.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me. It's you know, it's a cheap copy. You know, it's a knockoff. You know, it's a rip-off. So.
But what a compliment you've got! That's amazing. That's.
Well, you just you sort of accept that we live in a world where. So long as you're first with the idea, then everybody else will be second. That's the only way to look at it. So
there you go.
You have to sort of say thank you very much for trying to imitate me and trying to emulate the show that we produced. And you just shrug your shoulders and say thank you. I tell you the thing that I really get a chuckle out of more than being ripped off and copied is when singers like Fergie put me into Glamorous. And
that's got to be cool.
Jermaine Dupri had me flying up in the aeroplane with him on his video.
And Notorious B.I.G.
Yes, there's about 20 music videos that have spoofed me in one way or the other, and I just think that's the greatest.
Well, it is, because it's the ultimate association with the lifestyle they're trying to create.
Yeah, so that's fun. I like that bit.
We have one more question. Would you take it?
Yeah.
Shannon wants to know. Actually, Ted wants to know, outside of Siegfried and Roy, did any other popular Las Vegas residents appear on Lifestyles?
The answer is yes, many times. We used to love coming to Vegas to do segments for Lifestyles. You put me on the spot trying to remember stars that were in Vegas that we had on the show, but Robert Goulet comes to mind.
What about Liberace?
Liberace, thank you. That was one of my all-time favorite interviews.
Yes, I thought so.
And that's still up on YouTube to this day. You can actually watch the Liberace interview on YouTube. He gave us absolute, full, total open access to everything in that home.
I love his home.
Before it became a museum.
Yes.
So we got the advanced look of it. And what a nice, sweet, gentle man. Not a gentleman, but a gentle man.
Yes.
And yes, as we found out sadly afterwards about his sexual preferences, although we all sort of guessed and accepted it beforehand, but he was still a gentle soul, and he loved his music, and he loved the fact that he'd come from poverty, and through hard work had gone all the way to the top and become very rich, very famous, and very successful. And I think that was the reason behind the show's success, is that we tried to stay away from people who were born with the silver spoon.
Sure.
And we went to people who had struggled and made it.
And that's admirable, along with the fact that he was one of the more flamboyant characters in the entertainment field, I would imagine, particularly at that time.
Show business back then was different.
Yes.
It was glamorous and glitzy and larger than life. You compare that with Jersey Shore today,
yeah.
And I love the fact that you dress up when you sing. I think it's you're paying respect to the audience, yes, who therefore is paying respect to you, and you have a talent and you perform the talent. And then you look at Jersey Shore, and they're in the same clothes that, you know, that they came out of the mine earlier today with. I mean, it's terrible.
Well, let me ask you something. When Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous brand took off in the early 80s, it was a time of extravagance, and there was a different mindset.
The days of dynasty,
yes, the dynasty,
Colbys and Dallas.
Oh, I love that. Robert Wagner in his double-breasted jackets. I just love that era. My question to you is, would that idea for a show work today with the current economic state?
It's a great question, and I get asked 2-3 times a month to bring the show back.
Do you?
I will never do it.
Uh-huh.
It had its life, it had its time, and it had its place. And my theory has always been to go out on the top and not watch it wither down to a point where it gets cancelled. The funny thing is that I think that it would work today, and it would work in the same way that shows like King for a Day worked way back when.
Right, wow.
Because when you look at television and you look at the plethora of reality shows like Jersey Shore, what are you really watching? You're watching lifestyles of the tragic and unfortunate. you're watching lifestyles of the boring and miserable. And yes, in a sense, the television viewer at home, I really believe, wants to escape through this box.
Correct.
And so they don't want to see 8 kids who never do their laundry and live in a postage stamp apartment. They still want to think that there's a princess out there like Grace Kelly who can one day marry the prince. It's Cinderella. I mean, it's still there. That dream of being king for a day, queen for a day still exists. So to get a glimpse through the keyhole of lives that you only fantasize about and that you only dream about, if you can see it for 5 minutes, you don't resent it so long as it's earned. If it's given to people on a plate, they will resent you. But if you work hard, you know, thank goodness that for the majority of people in America today, the entrepreneurial spirit is alive and well, and that there is nothing wrong in being rewarded big time if you succeed in what you set out to achieve.
Well, I think I would like, on behalf of so many over the years, to thank you for letting us live vicariously through you and your adventures, your stories, and the images that you've brought into our homes that I think inspire us to want to better ourselves. And if I may, because we're having to leave, we're at the end of the line, I'd like to do a toast, because if some of you may or may not know, we have hit a milestone with Mr. Leach just recently. Oh. Not only have you celebrated a very important birthday, but you also celebrated 50 years in entertainment.
50 years of doing this nonsense.
And I'll tell you something, I want to thank you for inviting me to a tremendous celebration you had a couple weeks ago where you had people from all over the world that have known you through business and friends and family come together. And if that wasn't a tribute to how much people respect and appreciate what you've done, I don't know what is, but happy birthday to you, my friend. Congratulations on many years, and I hope it's just the beginning for you. Because the city of,
no, I want to take it easy.
Well, the city of Las Vegas thanks you, and you are certainly one of the few characters in this town that make it, without question, the greatest city in the world. Folks, you're watching Talktails. I'm Chris Phillips, and I'm sitting here with the iconic Robin Leach. We'll see you next Monday.
Champagne wishes.
And caviar dreams.